Hey guys, been a little while here since a cast. I wanted to take a little bit of a break here to figure out kind of what I wanted to do with my StarCraft game. I felt like it was getting maybe too Swarmhost centric. And I was kind of forgetting how much I love mutas. I actually went all that time and didn't even notice just how fun mutas were with the new movement speed and regeneration buffs. So I'm allowing myself to diversify a bit, even though my ZVP and my ZVT late game in particular are still very Swarmhost centric. But anyways, that's not actually the point of today's cast. This is something I've been wanting to do for quite a while and just never really made the time for, so I'm doing that now. What we have today is I'm actually going to be recording a guide on how to take your gameplay from bronze to gold pretty reliably by practicing against the AI actually. And this doesn't teach you cheese, doesn't teach you all-ins, this teaches you very stable macro play. But it's very basic macro play, and that's why it's something that I really recommend for bronze or silver players because it's extremely digestible. Before we get started, I suppose I should explain why I'm doing this and why I know it's reliable. First off, I'm doing this because I found that the more I coach bronze players, the more my training is just completely standardized. I can pretty much predict what questions are going to be asked, and I can predict what my answer is going to be. And the point that feels almost robotic, I feel like the student isn't getting what they're paying for. They're paying for personalized coaching. And if it's something I can give the exact same lesson for every time, then it might as well be a video that everyone can see for free. That just seems a lot more fair, and that way when I have a new student who comes on who's bronze, I can take a look at the replay and confirm, yes, they actually would benefit from this, and pass them over to the YouTube channel. So anyone who's going to be getting coaching, and I recommended you put this into practice first, just think of this like a free coaching session and take everything I say as homework until you're able to hit that high silver or gold level, and then we're ready to do something more personalized. For anyone watching on YouTube, I appreciate you tuning in, and I hope you get something out of this. So this is a reliable method that I've found for improving macro and eventually scouting and timing defense to a level that will easily put you into gold. And there's a few nice things about it. First off, we're going to get you set up with a build that'll work for all three races for quite some time. I would say at least till mid-gold, maybe even low platinum. The other nice thing about it is it's going to set some foundation for your play all the way up into Master League, or if you make it there, hopefully Grandmaster League. This is teaching some of the most basic things like larva injection and clean spending. And it's doing it via muscle memory. It's going to develop on its own because there's absolutely no way for you to successfully achieve the goals we're going to set for you without clean spending and without clean larva injection and without a nice tight build order. And this all develops on its own, so that's really the best part. Now, what this is going to be is the actual process itself occurs in three phases. I'm going to show the first and second one, and I'll go ahead and kind of detail what those are, but I'm only showing the first and second one because the third one is really more there to push you kind of past that gold level. The first one is going to just be ZVP, and you're just going to open up with the same build you're using in all three matchups, which is a 14 pool, 15 hatch. Anyone who knows build orders, they're going to say, well, that's not quite optimal. There's going to be some delay on the queen popping after the pool and things like that. But that's not our goal. We're not going for optimal. We're going for easy to execute. And we're going for defensible. A 14 pool can defend a 6 pool in ZVZ. Vice versa, it can keep up with command center first well enough. Especially if you're putting this all to practice, your opponent who's command center first, who's missing half of their SCV spawns, they're going to be out macroed very heavily. Even though technically it's not as good as a hatch first versus CC first. The second phase is when we've got our timings nice and tight on the build order itself, we're going to take this economic focus and we're going to switch it over to timing attack. And that's when we start learning some basics of scouting and of rush defense. We might be defending against a 4-gate or a 6-gate or any number of things. From what I've seen from the AI, it does mix it up pretty well these days. The timings will be arriving anywhere from 6 minutes to about 8.5 minutes, and that's perfect because that's very representative of what you see online. And with each of these phases, we're just gradually bumping up our difficulty until we achieve a time for a 200-200 army that meets our goal. The last phase is when we blow it wide open and we go random and all builds. And that's when you're really going to have to focus on the scouting. And you can start to apply this to other matchups. You can start to say, well, I was very roach heavy for my timing defense versus Protoss, but when I had that same defense versus Terran, Marauder and Siege tanks cleaved me up, so maybe I want to be more Ling Bane heavy. So that's where you can start to develop those skills. And all of this occurs against the AI because you can do it at your own pace. You can review the game at your own pace. You can quit if you felt like you had a bad game and you want to start over. You can do it however you want, but the best thing of all is there's no pressure like there is against a live opponent. So I'm going to play the first two. I'm going to play the economic focus and then the timing attack, because those play out very differently. And then I'll leave the third one up to you. But the reason I'm playing through these is in large part to give you a template. You can take a look at what I do and say, okay, well, he achieved like 11 or 12 minutes. That's pretty good. So maybe I'll set my goal to 14 minutes and I'll see if I can reproduce the timings he made. Eventually, hopefully you make this build your own. Hopefully you start to deviate from what I showed and start to set up your own timings that make sense to you and fit your own playstyle. That's entirely up to you. But all we're going for here is just a very straightforward goal of 200-200 on 2 bases as quickly as possible. And we'll keep trying to beat our time, or you'll keep trying to beat your time, until you've achieved something around, I would say, 13 to 14 minutes at minimum. If you really want to do well, shoot for about 12 minutes. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and go into the game. Now, admittedly, my first take, I actually supply blocked, because I was spending so much time trying to explain things. So there might be a little less commentary for this one, because my first priority here is for this to be a nice, clean run-through that you can take as a example of how you want to approach this, and then go from there. So I'm going to try to explain things as I do them, and I'm going to do my best to explain them so that both people who are brand new to RTS or people who are just new to StarCraft can digest them. But my first priority is going to be executing this build in a clean fashion, so I apologize if there's some pauses. It's just really hard to cast and play at the same time, even if it's just executing a basic build order. So we're going to go ahead and go up to 9 drones, and then Overlord. And I'm not going to explain some of these decisions. For anyone who's really brand new to StarCraft, and, some of these standards are just widely accepted, and there's definitely good reason for it. So I'll just say for now, take my word for it. If you'd like to research it, certainly feel free. So we're going to go ahead, and once our Overlord pops, we're going to drone up to 14. Just a really basic, straightforward pool timing. It's very safe against most things we're going to see at Bronze League. And most of what we'll see at Silver League as well. Although there's some good Silver League cheesers. I've seen that before. Alright, so we're just about ready for a pool. We're constantly looking up at our supply count because we really want to pay close attention to this. This is that stage in the game where it's absolutely critical that our build is flawless. The difference between dropping this pool accidentally at 13, or maybe accidentally dropping it at 270 minerals, versus dropping it right there at exactly 200 minerals and 14 supply, it's huge. It's that point of stability that you need for the rest of your game. So I can't stress enough that you really just need to make sure that your first probably 4 minutes of gameplay, 5 minutes of gameplay, are just spot on. Now we're going to go ahead and at 200 minerals, go ahead and pull over and drop that hatch. And keep in mind, since we're against an economic opponent who's very easy, we're just going to go ahead and try our best to get a nice clean max. That's all we need. We're not worrying about defending against timings. We're just focusing on the macro side of it. Just those very easy to manage droning and queen timings. Alright, so we see one of those little inefficiencies with the build. We're a little bit off on the queen. That's fine. If this was a 15 pool, it would be spot on. And we're making a queen and then 2 zerglings. You can go up to 4 zerglings if you'd rather be a little more safe to cheese that hasn't yet been scouted. Maybe a proxy rack, something to that effect. But I find 2 zerglings right now versus most anything in the metagame, if there is such a thing versus bronze, is going to be pretty safe. But again, if you find once you go live on the ladder, you're losing to a lot of stuff, you'll want to go ahead and up that a little bit. And just to play it safe, we're going to go ahead and overlord at 20. You can technically push that out to 22, but there's a little room to forget there. And once this first queen finishes, we're going to start a second queen right away. This first queen's going to scoot down to our natural. This is so that we have double injection going as quickly as possible. Now, once we get into the scouting portion, we're going to move these zerglings across the map and we're going to see what we can find. But for now, we're just focusing on clean macros, so that's all we're doing here. Alright, I moved one drone over, and then otherwise I just have my drones related to my natural. 16 drones is optimal mining, so we're shooting for that for now, and then we'll push it up to 22 to 24 here later on, believe it or not, because we're going for the best we can possibly get off of 2 base, even if that's not quite as efficient as it could be. But we're not worried about our third timing for now. Alright, so now, right now, all we're doing is just making drones, making drones, making drones. I would say around 33 to 34 supply, you can go ahead and make a blind spine crawler. This is just to prepare you for when you start going live. I would say it's a good, safe standard to use that you make a spine crawler before 40 supply every game. Notice the timing that's going to work out with your typical 4 gate these days. Unless perfectly executed Korean 4 gate, it's going to hit around probably 6 minutes after one full warp cycle. And that gives us a little bit of time here for that spine crawler to finish. Now, optimally, you want a lot more than that, but that's where scouting comes in. Alright, we're up to 44 supply now, and whoa, supply block. Yeah, like I said, casting and playing. So there's an easy solution to this, and this is actually good. Notice our minerals are getting high, and we supply blocked. We're going to solve that by doing that. And don't be afraid to do this for a while. That's called a macro hatchery, and that's a great way to account for otherwise bad macros. So notice our economy's cleaned up. And that was completely ad-lib. I did not plan to supply block there. I just said, you know what? That's the solution to the problem. And so we're going to go ahead and start another queen here for it. And we're getting ready here to go ahead and grab our 3rd and 4th gas. Let's go ahead and do that because we're getting pretty high on those minerals. Notice we don't want our mineral saturation to ever go above 24 because that's the maximum saturation on a mineral line. Now all we're doing here is just keeping clean injections and making drones. That's it. Very straightforward. And our economy is just skyrocketing. This is taking advantage of an advantage Zerg has. They can power out drones. They can actually create them exponentially, whereas the other races create them at a static rate. And that's very important. And we're actually going to go straight up to 24 drones on each base because we're going for the best possible economy we can have on 2 bases. Now, anyone who's watched a lot of programs says you want to shoot for 16 per base, but that's only when you are on more than 2 bases. Alright, so we can clean up a few things here. Notice we started our layer too late and our spending's not quite perfect. So we're going to go ahead and make 1 extra queen, because it's always good to have 1 queen over your hatchery count. And we're going to drop a roach horn and get ready to start making some roaches here. For now, we're just going to preemptively make overlords. Now, this is not something I recommend to do at gold or higher. But for now, there's nothing wrong with it. You're just trying to keep your larva low enough that it's going to be under max. You don't want more than 3 larvae per hatchery. So now we see we've made a lot of overlords. We're over 3 larvae per hatchery. Let's make some zerglings. If we're going for the quickest possible 200, we're going to want to be very roach heavy. Now that's not necessarily the best composition. It's just hitting our goal as quickly as possible. And roaches happen to be a very good unit, so why not? Generally speaking, you're going to be able to do this challenge with nothing but roachling and hydra. And you will be very good against all things your typical bronze, silver, and gold leaguer are going to throw at you because you just have more stuff. Now notice the phase of the game just changed dramatically. We're at 23 on main, 24 on natural. I'm happy with that. I would say as long as you're over 55 drones, you're going to do well here with your max timing. And I'm just preemptively making some overlords because I'm going to max out super fast here. And this macro hatch, even if we hadn't messed up our supply block earlier, it's incredibly important for this challenge, and it's incredibly important for your play overall. You'll want to make sure you have a macro hatch, I would say by no later than the 10-minute mark, even if you're going for 3 base play, just until you're at least Diamond League. Then you're starting to get some tighter spending, some tighter timings, and you won't need the macro hatchery quite as early. But even pros, they make it by the time they're on 4 bases at minimum, versus pretty much all 3 races. Usually quite a bit sooner. Now we can look here and say there's room for improvement. We got our roach speed. I'd call that one of the mandatory upgrades. But we can see we're starting to float some gas. And we don't necessarily want to be wasting. So as a bonus, you could say I'm going to hit the same time, but I'm going to get 1-1 on my missile and carapace so that I have a 1-1 200 max supply timing attack. Now you've got something really viable online, something legitimately scary. You're adding a little bit of method to your madness there. But we're just trying to max out. Now it looks like we're just going to barely beat a 12-minute with a supply block at 44, so that's not bad at all. So we're going to go ahead and finish out the last of this supply, and we'll take note of our time. And done. Okay, so 6 seconds. And that's it. We just leave the game. We win. If you want to go and A-move your opponent and watch things die, that's pretty cool too. That's up to you. Some people find it really gratifying. But let's go ahead and watch the replay just real quick. I'm going to cruise through it. Your first time running through that, especially if you're new to RTS, don't be surprised or frustrated if it takes you 20 plus minutes. That's fine. That's completely normal. I've seen people start at 25 to 30 minutes for that 200 supply that we just did. And by the time they're done, they're rocking 13 or 14 minute max consistently online. Especially versus Protoss, because you can afford to max versus Protoss on Roach. So don't be afraid to keep at it, or I should say don't be discouraged. You got to make sure to keep at it. That's probably the biggest deterrent that I see as someone gives this a try, and especially if they see me do it first, sometimes I'll start a coaching session by giving them a replay to play off of, and they'll be like, oh cool, I'm totally going to do 11 minutes and 46 seconds. And then they do 25 minutes and they're discouraged. That's normal. Just try and compare here. And I'm going to try and point out now that we're getting to the point where I wasn't able to cast as much. We'll do 2-speed. Okay, so the important things that are going to decide this. Keeping your queen injections consistent. We saw that. Keeping your supply blocks, or keeping your supply clean. I would say the big one that really holds people back, and I even see this at Diamond League, I see people who get like a 28 supply block every single game, and that's so bad. It's like their hatchery pops and then they just forget that Overlord, and it just happens every game. And it's the difference between them being a Diamond level player or a Master level player. That's not an exaggeration. It single-handedly makes that difference, because when you supply block early on, especially if it's a hard supply block, it's a full production time of an Overlord. I think that's, what, a minute and a half? I have no larva. That's a good sign. No, God. I'm thinking of the mineral count, and then I was... never mind. I'm smoking crack. So 25 seconds. That's a big deal. That's enough that by the time you're maxed, you may have tacked on an extra probably 2 minutes onto your max, because that's time that you're taking away from drone mining, because that supply could have been 8 drones. And then that means you make less drones later on because of that compounding factor that Zerg droning has. It has that exponential growth. So you stagger that. Now the other important thing here is when we knew when it was time to make this macro hatch, and this I want to talk about in more detail. I made it in a reactionary fashion because I said, you know what, I'm a bad player, let's supply block at 44 while we're talking and playing at the same time. And while casting, my brain just said, you know what, what's the best solution to this? I looked up at my minerals, I said 450 minerals. Okay, it's a little high. I'm not going to be able to fix it by just dropping my extractors a little earlier than I normally would. Let's drop a macro hatch. And that's something that needs to be ingrained in your mind, because that becomes really important later on. Because if you develop this kind of muscle memory approach to your spending, then when you're in a high-level game, you're playing Diamond or Master, or hopefully even higher than that, and you've got all sorts of things going on. There's harassment and all sorts of garbage like that, and you notice that a couple of your hatcheries got sniped and your spending is having a rough time. You look up and you see 2,000 minerals up there. You want it to be just an instantaneous reaction that you drop a couple hatcheries in response. Not a kind of situation where you say, oh, let's do another couple spending cycles and see if that cleans up and then we'll drop one. No, that's not what you want, because by that point you've lost the game due to hanging out at 120 supply for 2 minutes straight. So we'll give you a rule for that, which is, it's something I've followed myself for the entirety of my StarCraft 2, which is just, I call it the macro hatch rule. For every 1,000 minerals, when you realize you're floating and cannot spend the resources, you make a macro hatch. And that carries all the way through to late game. Now, I made this preemptively because I knew there was no possible way I would spend those 450 minerals with the supply block I had. And we found that my droning actually was very clean as a result. I was able to spend all my larvae the moment my overlord popped. And still the macro hatch went down at a nice clean time. But as a standard, whenever you realize you're at 1,000 minerals or higher and you can't spend the minerals, drop 1 macro hatch per 1,000 minerals. If that means in a 20-minute game versus Terran, you look up and you see 3,000 minerals, you drop 3 macro hatcheries, that's not a bad thing. It's going to improve over time by nature of you just gradually becoming a better macro Zerg player. It's going to be okay on that end. So don't feel like because you made 5 macro hatcheries in a game, you're cursed to have bad macro. It just happened to be that game taxed your multitasking. The other thing is, as I mentioned, try and standardize when you grab your macro hatchery for a while, especially as you're working on this 2-base play. Now, if we were a master level player, that macro hatchery maybe would have been a 3rd, especially versus Protoss. But we're not. We're practicing bronze to gold, which means we don't want to spread ourselves thin. If that macro hatchery becomes a 3rd, we've now given our opponent an additional point of attack. If they're dropping or they're air harassing, we've given them a total of 3 points of attack, and that puts us at a significant disadvantage versus the macro hatchery, because we're, as a bronze to gold level player, we're not yet rocking 200 APM and we don't have the multitasking to fight on 3 fronts. So I hope that explains some of the rationale. That's probably the biggest one that I get a lot of question marks from when I mention it during coaching. So, well, why is the macro hatch so important? And it really is that important. Okay, so let's cruise a little bit since I spent a lot of time paused. So, we're going to go ahead and drop the roach horn. Now, there's some room for improvement here. I was kind of casting while playing, and I don't usually do this build anymore when I run this drill. I actually have my own build that I run. It's an 11 over pool, but that's a whole different story. We can look at this and say, you know what, we had to make a lot of Zerglings there to keep our spending clean, and our minerals or our gas got really high towards the end there. We need to bump up that roach warren timing. So we may say, as a standard, we drop our roach warren maybe before our layer starts, maybe before we're at 100 gas. Maybe we could even say as we start our metabolic boost, because we started our metabolic boost to stay nice and safe before we started our layer. So we could say, okay, we drop metabolic boost, we drop roach warren, and we begin saving up for our layer. That's entirely up to you. Where this build goes is entirely in your control. So you can do whatever you want to it as long as you feel that is an improvement, and as long as it improves your time once you're getting to phase 2 and phase 3. Okay, we'll go ahead and just finish this out. Now, this is the point where it becomes really important that we start preemptively making overlords. And if that means you're at for now, if that means you're at 130 supply out of 200 before you start making more roaches, I'm not too worried about that. But once you start playing against timing attack on hard or very hard, you're probably going to start noticing that if you made 16 consecutive overlords, you get punished by the AI for it. Because you'll probably make those 16 consecutive overlords right about the point that a 2-base timing arrives. So it reinforces it and teaches you good habits there. As a standard, this is kind of just a general rule of thumb. When you're under 50 supply, you can make 1 overlord when needed. That's generally going to be 4 to 6 supply before it's actually required, before you block. When you're over 100 supply, that becomes 2 overlords. And when you're over, I would say, about 125 to 150 supply, that becomes doubled again to 4 overlords. Now, when you're on roaches, I would say that last portion you double. I'd say at 150 supply, you go ahead and just make 8 overlords, because even just on 3 hatcheries, you're going to eat that up so fast. Okay, so that was our first run through. That was very easy AI on economic focus Protoss. No pressure whatsoever, just solo macro. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do a play again. Big shout out from Nazareth, or to Nazareth. He's so awesome. Okay, so now what we're going to do is, if you were practicing this on your own, you'd say, okay, I hit my goal. Maybe my goal was 15 minutes or 14 minutes, or you could be like, I want to be really cool and hit 12 minutes or under. Once you do that versus very easy, start ramping it up. Do easy next, see if you can do it. Then do medium and see if you can do it. Then hard, see if you can do it. Then do harder. Finally, if you can do it versus very hard or elite, then you're pretty awesome. I will say elite cheats pretty badly, so yeah, I wouldn't worry about that too much. It's kind of an exercise in frustration. I generally do my practice against very hard. But I'm going to, for the sake of this demo, I'm going to do harder, because that's probably going to be a lot of people's stopping point. Okay, so we're going to do now phase 2 of this. And this is when we've gotten a good 12 or 13 minutes versus a harder or very hard economic focus Protoss. And we're ready to say, okay, let's work on some scouting and some timing defense. Because our live players, our live opponents, they're not going to sit back and let us macro to 200 with no interruptions. Now, some of them are going to be bad enough that they will, and you're going to auto-win those games, which is great. But we want to be able to hold those opponents who say, I'm going to make 5 gates on 2 base, and it's going to be a really inefficient, sloppy attack, but it might kill you because you're making nothing but drones. So we're going to learn then, just again by way of trying to beat our time, how to not only hold the push, but still hit a nice clean time. I would say for this one, if you can do better than 13 minutes, you're in phenomenal shape. Even when doing this demo, I may not do better than 13 minutes. It just depends on what I scout. Now, I'm going to play this under the assumption that I don't know it's coming, because phase 3, you switch to any build, and that's when you have to scout it and react to it, which is the closest representation of online play. So I'm going to operate under that assumption, and you should too. You don't want to be in a situation where you say, oh, look at that. I know which variety of timing attack this is. He's going to be hitting at 5 minutes 37 seconds, so we'll go ahead and drop 4 spines at 4 minutes 45 seconds. You never want to be able to say that. You want it to be a case where you're starting to develop some basics to your scouting. You're just starting to poke up with a Zergling and see that he hasn't taken a natural yet, or if you have seen that he hasn't taken a natural yet, you even maybe suicide one Zergling up the ramp and you say, holy crap, he's got a stockpile of zealots, he's going to be coming at me. Now, that might not be directly representative of a live game, but you're just starting to react to what you see. That's all that's important there. Alright, so this is what I consider to be the end point of your phase 2. This is when you're about ready to go into phase 3, which is when we turn it to random and any build. So that hopefully you have kind of 2 measuring sticks, the starting point and the end point. If you can beat this in under 12 or under 13 minutes, I would say you probably can go to ladder. So hopefully this gives you something to work with. I'll say when I'm doing this on my own, I'm doing my 11 overpool practice as a warm-up, I once in a while lose to this when I have it on the very hard setting. Especially when I have it on insane, I'll lose to that maybe 30 or 40%. But the important thing is it's practice, and it helps you spot holes in your scouting. It helps you spot underreactions. You know, if you go in and you scout 6 gateways and you only make 2 spines, then that's indicative that you probably underreacted, and the AI was quick to let you know of that. Now, you're going to notice I'm very spine heavy with this defense, and there's a few reasons for that. Number 1, it's versus Protoss. Generally speaking, gateway timings, they're going to lose to spines. Number 2, spines are very supply efficient, and they're very larva efficient. You know, you can, for the same number of larvae, you can make 2 Zerglings, or you can make 1 spine crawler. And I would say in terms of kind of intrinsic value, on average, it's probably worth about 8 to 10 speedlings. So that's very good. And then very supply efficient. You're actually losing 1 supply rather than gaining 4 to 10, depending on what you made. Okay, talking my pool's a little late there. But anyways, that's why I'm going to be very spine heavy. That's not to say I would necessarily be as spine heavy in a live game, but I feel like it develops, helps you develop some really good habits. Spine crawlers really do win games until about diamond, and then you start to notice times when you maybe overbuilt spines and that lost you the game. But until high platinum, low diamond, overbuilding spines really isn't a problem. Especially if you just have all around more stuff than the opponent because your droning is so efficient. You can afford some inefficiency in your spine count. Alright, so we're, again, doing the exact same thing. We're ready to go ahead and drop that Overlord at 15. And then we're going to make a Queen, and then 2 Zerglings, and then back to full droning. And this is going to look identical until my Zerglings pop, and then you're going to notice where this becomes very different. So, first thing I'm doing is just rallying right to the natural. This is a great habit for you to develop as a Zerg player versus all 3 races. Eventually you'll start to develop, you know, maybe where do I want my Overlord to go? Maybe versus Terran this isn't such a good idea. Versus Protoss, it's a pretty good idea though. All that you can develop on your own. I'm not worried about that. The AI will have a great time punishing you for bad overlord positioning and failing to scout with your Zerglings. So you're going to learn that all on your own while practicing this drill. Alright, we're ready to inject, transfer, and start another queen. And now, notice my APM requirement just went up a bit because I'm now scouting with these two Zerglings. So this is where you're actually going to naturally develop higher APM as well, by way of meeting the needs of this drill. Also, I noticed my minerals are pretty high, so I'm going to react to that and say, you know what, queens are pretty good against defense, or pretty good against timings. Okay, we saw Gateway first. We know he's not Forge first or Nexus first. We're going to keep that in mind. We might not make a spine right away. That would be a bit of an overreact, but we're going to go ahead and let our 3 queens here and a good Zergling scout tell us what could be coming. So we've got 1 Zergling left. That's very good. If you find these Zerglings are dying too fast and you're not able to keep them alive quite as consistently, then maybe just go up to 4 Zerglings until you're more comfortable with your micro and your multitasking. Because it is absolutely crucial that you keep 1 Zergling outside of their natural at all times. And we got a spare queen here, so we'll go ahead and start some creep tumors. This is a great improvement you can make when you're already hitting your timings. Probe coming out and no natural. This right here, this tells me everything I need to see. If this was a gateway expand, like a mothership core expand, we'd already see a natural. So we're going to go ahead and go 1, 2, 3, and that'll be good. Okay, so now this is one area where you can cheat or you can not cheat. The AI, it likes to dance around with the probe. Your live player, your live opponent, if they see 1 Zergling, they're going to just run right by and get that proxy pylon down for their gateway timing. So I would recommend you go ahead and let the probe out because it's going to determine when that timing hits. Okay, that's a whole lot of crap. So now we're going to do this completely reactionary. We're going to say, you know what, that's all gateway units. We're going to go ahead and drop our Roach Warren. We're going to drop an additional extractor. We're still droning because we made a whole bunch of these spine crawlers. That's going to buy us some time to get the roaches out. And we've got a little bit of time because we just saw when they were moving out. So we're going to reposition to something a little healthier here. And we're just trying to buy time and get a few extra overlords here so that we can make a nice roach switch to defend against this. Normally I would be grabbing metabolic boost right now, but we need the gas for these roaches that are going to be necessary. So we poke in here, and this can, this can be something that you standardize. That's up to you. I just have it on a rally, and when that rally arrives, I have my scout. I'll pull it back if I've already seen enough information that I know it's not necessary. But what that poke did is it did a few things. It allowed us to see, is Warp Gate finished? And how many units are at home? I was able to infer from how many units are at home that actually the aggression isn't arriving yet. So I just did another cycle of drones. Now, one improvement you can make to what I'm doing right here is, notice I haven't had a Zergling for quite some time. So when your Zerglings die, go ahead and replace it. Take a look and see what you've got. Now we notice, okay, we couldn't spend that cycle. Let's go ahead and start our layer and let's start our macro hatchery. Alright, so here comes some aggression, it looks like. So now we're ready to go ahead and defend. So he sees those spines, and don't be surprised if this is the reaction from your live opponents as well. They go, holy crap, that's a lot of spines. And they're going to start swearing at you, calling you a turtle, and it's a kind of cool. Especially because a lot of times your bronze level opponents, they think you're just ridiculously under drone because of all those spines you made. When in actuality, you're just fine on drone count. Alright, so on that note, we're at 21 and 20. So we're going to go ahead and make 8 drones. 7 drones, actually. And that'll be good. And it's going to put us 1 under. So we were saying before we could make an improvement by mixing in some 1-1. So let's do that here. So there's my 1-1. I'm going to put them on my spacebar control group because I feel cool when I use my spacebar control group. Alright, now we're ready to go ahead and just spam out those roaches. Now, the interesting thing that happened here was, and the AI will definitely do this, especially when you have it set to a harder difficulty level, like harder. That was clever. They're going to see the spines and turn around, and that's the AI trying to reproduce a smart player. Your smarter players, they're going to see the spines, they're going to turn around because they know it's a bad trade. They're also going to know they have you in a contain. They're going to know they can take a third, or at least take a natural now, finally, and try and recover any lost macro, because that hard contain is going to last quite some time. But if you've been following these droning best practices, you're going to be able to go ahead and just blow them away on macro. And by the time they do finally start getting that natural saturated, you're going to be able to go ahead and just push out and kill them. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and supply block a few more times. There we go. Me not following my own rules. Do what I say, not what I do. So we're going to go ahead and now just spam out those roaches. I'd say, given what we were responded to, we may not do 12 minutes. We'll probably do a little under 13 minutes, which is just fine. Especially because we're tacking on 1-1. This is going to hit like a ton of bricks. You want to get really clever, you can throw on burrow. Maybe throw on burrow move as well. Then you've got a pretty brutal Stefano style push from Wings of Liberty. And you very authentically are hitting a similar timing. That's not to say you're Stefano. Stefano would be on 4 base, or at least 3 base by that time, and would have a much healthier drone count. But the strength of the push is very similar. You've got 1-1, you've got burrow, you've got 200 supply. And that's kind of a cool feeling for, you know, a bronze level player to be able to throw that against another bronze level player and watch them leave the game without saying a word. Seen a ton of replays like that after someone starts putting this into practice. Alright. One more supply block because I talk too much. You guys get the idea. We're going to probably, even after these supply blocks are cleaned up, we're going to max at about 1250. And without all the talking, we would have probably been about 1215. Not bad at all, given that we defended. Probably very heavy aggression. We'll check the replay. Okay, that one doesn't count. Okay, there we go. We'll throw in a Zergling for good measure. We still beat 13 minutes. I'm a happy camper. Okay. Without talking, there's no doubt in my mind we could have done that in 12 minutes. None whatsoever. But I would say, by and large, if you can handle that in 13 minutes, you're doing pretty well. You're probably going to skyrocket to high gold, low platinum. But really your goal is just, hey, let's break into gold, maybe high silver if we're having a lot of trouble in other areas. I've seen some cases where maybe they only get to high silver because their macro just absolutely sucks. Like they just right-click on everything, or their micro, I should say. They just right-click on everything, and they're like, oh, look, a Colossus. Let's right-click all my Zerglings. You know, that kind of thing. But otherwise, you should consistently get to gold with this. So let's watch the replay. This one I'm going to go through a little quicker because I am getting hoarse. So we're going to cruise through the early game 8 speed. There's nothing to see here. It's all the same. What we want to look at is how my scouting changed what I did. We started to learn some timings, and I'm not going to tell you these timings. I want you to discover these timings on your own. You can look them up if you want. By all means, go for it. But it's really helpful if you're able to go ahead and just play the game and say, oh, well, he didn't take his natural until 5 minutes. He didn't take his natural until after 5 minutes. We're still looking up. Yeah, still no natural. Okay, we see a probe trying to move out. You can use those as cues later on when you're in Master League. You can use these little indicators to say, okay, I've got something coming. For example, right now, if this were a live opponent, he doesn't probe scout me, and then at 5 minutes he's trying to sneak a probe out with still no natural. I say to myself, okay, it's not 4-gate because his probe would have already left earlier. Maybe I missed a probe, maybe something snuck out, but otherwise it's not 4-gate. It's actually a different kind of timing. First off, that's the point I'm probably going to go ahead and just have actually both overlords move in. I'm going to suicide from both angles because I'd rather be safe than sorry and know exactly what I'm up against. Because I'm already ahead on drones, I know that much for sure. Then I'm going to say, okay, what are the possibilities? Well, he's going to be gimmicky. It could be a warp prism all in. I've seen quite a few of those at Master and Grandmaster. Could be a 1 base immortal all in. Those happen a lot too. Could be a void ray timing, or it could be Dark Templar expand. Technically, if they're going to Dark Templar and then expand, it can be a case where they take their natural after the Dark Templar warp in, and so we might not see a natural yet. So this probe's moving out to place the pylon. So notice what we're instinctively making. Now this is instinctively what we're making just to beat the AI, but we're making 3 spines and a spore. Well, it's going to actually be good against all of those. Now if it's warp prism harass, that's a little scary, but keep in mind they're going to be dependent on 1 base production. So that's where once you go live, you're going to have to start scouting that and recognizing when you need to defend your ramp. Maybe have a spine up on the high ground. You're going to have a macro hatch here sometimes, and that's going to help a lot too. But the important thing is that, what was that tangent all about? The important thing is what we made here, generally speaking, is going to help you against all of those. And you're already ahead on drones, so all you're worried about is buying yourself time to get more ahead. And most importantly, all you're worried about is not dying. So if you find you're losing to something, you're losing to a certain timing that the AI once in a while throws at you, start amping up that spine crawler count, or maybe bumping up your roach warren timing if it's a 2-base play. And that's going to be very practical when you go live. Alright, so we get back in and we see, well, there's a lot of units, but they're back home. This is something much later. This is just an all-around bad push from our opponent if this was a live opponent. But we're not too worried about that. We're just worried about what we can do to hold it. Now let's check to everyone here. Yeah, I mean, this honestly, a live opponent, if they were opening up like Gateway Expand into this timing, you're going to probably see, at Masters level, you're going to see probably 2 to 4 more Zealots and like 6 Sentries with that. I mean, they can hit much, much harder than that. Maybe it'll hit about 845 rather than 9, or 845 or 9 rather than 820, but it's going to hit so much harder. But nevertheless, you're going to have Roaches on the way. You're going to have 3 Spines and a Spore. You're going to have a Spore to shoot down their Mothership Core or any Dark Templar mixed in. There's all sorts of great things about that hold. So we got good practice in here, and then we went ahead and said, okay, we held. We don't know what our opponent's doing, but at this point we don't care because we're making nothing but units. The only thing that could possibly hurt us here is a Void Ray transition, and we'll learn to start scouting that in Phase 3. Okay, so I'm actually not going to play out... Hey, you guys can see my achievements because I'm fat-fingered. Okay, I'm not actually going to play out Phase 3. Suffice to say, once you start doing that, and I would say under 13 minutes, and if you want to really be a rock star, do it in under 12 minutes, then you go ahead and you go back into Daylight Watcher. You say, well, let's go ahead and switch to Phase 3. Which is, again, when you go ahead and go back to very easy. You can maybe, you'll probably find very easy to just be too easy. Maybe do medium. Random, any build, and go for it. And once you can do that in, I would say, depending on what race you're against and what build they do, consistently beat 13 minutes, consistently beat 13 and a half minutes, you will destroy people online. I can't stress it enough. Now okay, this is getting pretty long, so I'm going to close it up here. There's a few more points I want to make. The critical thing about this method is that it sticks. I see a lot of people who, they do this, they rock out 100 games, they get them all taken care of, and they're able to send me replays of 12-minute maxes versus economy and 13-minute maxes versus timing pushes. And I say, cool, take it online. And they promote within a week to silver, and then another week into gold. And then they forget everything they learned. They get into gold, and then they start just plummeting. Because the moment they hit, like a certain break point, they say, cool, let's go ahead and try everything that a pro does. Or let's start mixing in tons of Infestors and Vipers. We're nowhere near learning how to use high micro units like Infestors and Vipers. This is just max out and win. You're using A-move friendly units to solidify those macro fundamentals. To give you a long-term goal, if you don't, have a coach, or if you just are trying to do all this on your own, to give you a long-term goal, I would say by low diamond maybe you want to start mixing in high micro units. I see tons of platinum players committing to 8+ Vipers and just letting them A-move because they have all their army under one hotkey, or spamming abducts all on one unit accidentally. It's just too much for you to keep in mind while still making sure that this macro occurs. Now, what you can use as a nice step up is 3-base play. Once you hit gold, then you go ahead and you start learning when it's safe to take a 3rd, because now you're practicing against live opponents, and you're starting to reach a point where you can take what you see the pros do and what you see the streamers do, and you can incorporate it into your play, because now you have that foundation of scouting, timing defense, and macro, most importantly, to be able to implement that. You understand why the Zerg player feels comfortable taking a fast 3rd versus Nexus 1st. You get that. Whereas previously you may have watched that same exact game and said, oh, that must mean I can take a 4-minute 3rd versus all Protoss, which is absolutely not true. So now that you're getting to that point, go ahead and start mixing in a 3rd. By diamond, by mid-platinum, then start mixing in the high micro units. Then start really making it your own. Start finding compositions that maybe are a bit more unorthodox but happen to work for you. That's when you can really get creative, because you've earned that right. And that's when you can really start working on your micro as well. Okay, so like I said, this is getting too long. I'm long-winded and I like to hear myself talk. Oh yeah. Feel free to post in the comments or message me with any questions you guys have. I'm happy to support this method in any way with any questions you guys have, or if you have improvements. So that's about it. Thanks a bunch for watching, guys.